The alien queen selected a human prisoner as the father of her child, HFY. The wind howled through the barren landscape of the human colony, carrying with it the faint scent of ash. The harsh, unforgiving environment mirrored the lives of those trapped in the Zalthari prison facility. For Jack Ryder, the daily routine had become a struggle to stay alive, to keep his mind sharp, and to keep the fire of his humanity burning in a place designed to crush it. Jack had been imprisoned here for over a year now, ever since the Zalthari Empire had launched its attack on Earth. The aliens, a technologically advanced race of reptilian creatures, were merciless in their conquest. Most of humanity had been either killed or enslaved, and only a small number of prisoners, including Jack, had been kept alive for reasons he didn't fully understand. Each day, Jack fought to retain his humanity. He had seen what the Zalthari did to others, how they broke their spirits, how they stripped them of everything that made them human. Some prisoners had already given in, their will shattered like fragile glass, but not Jack. He would not be one of them. He had been a soldier before, a man who had fought to protect his people. Now he was nothing more than a number on a cell door, a prisoner. But he still had a mind, and he still had his pride. The prison facility was located on a cold, desolate world far from Earth, a planet the Zalthari had taken from an ancient civilization. The prison itself was a dark, towering structure, surrounded by thick walls and guarded by creatures that were far more dangerous than anything Jack had faced in battle. He had learned quickly to stay out of their way, to keep his head down and avoid unnecessary attention. The food was barely edible, the water always tainted with chemicals, and the guards, if you could even call them that, were brutal. But Jack had one thing the Zalthari didn't expect, the spirit of a human. That was why he survived. It was what kept him alive every single day. On one particularly cold morning, as the sun barely peeked over the horizon, an alarm echoed through the prison. It was a deep, bone-rattling sound that made everyone freeze in their tracks. Jack stood in his small cell, his eyes narrowing as he heard the noise. He'd heard this sound before only a few times, and each time it meant something had gone horribly wrong or terribly right. Then the ground shook beneath his feet. A ship massive, sleek, and dark descended from the sky, its engines roaring as it landed outside the prison. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He had seen these ships before, but never this close. It was an Zalthari flagship, and this one wasn't here for a casual visit. The guards immediately sprang into action, forming tight ranks as they scrambled to get into position. Jack knew something big was happening, but he had no idea what. Minutes later, a large figure appeared in the courtyard of the prison. It was a female, towering over the other Zalthari, her scales glinting in the weak sunlight. She was dressed in ornate armor, the design intricate and alien, clearly marking her as someone of importance. There was no mistaking it. This was the queen. The queen of the Zalthari Empire herself had come to this forsaken world. Jack watched from his cell, curiosity and suspicion rising in his chest. The queen was an enigmatic figure, one who was rarely seen by anyone, even by the highest-ranking members of the Zalthari. Her name was Zora, and she ruled with absolute authority over her people. She was known for her brilliance in strategy and leadership, but also for her cold, calculated decisions. No one ever questioned her. But today, something was different. Today, she was here in the prison, and it was clear she wasn't here for a typical inspection. The Zalthari guards stepped aside, and the queen moved forward, her eyes scanning the rows of prisoners. Jack could feel her gaze on him, a cold, piercing stare that seemed to see straight through him. There was something unsettling about her presence, as though she was examining not just his body, but his very soul. A low murmur rippled through the prisoners, but they were quickly silenced by the guards. The queen stepped closer to Jack's cell, her gaze never leaving him. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Jack could hear the pounding of his heart in his ears. Then, without a word, the queen gestured for the guards to open his cell. Jack stood still, his mind racing. He had no idea what was going on, but he knew one thing: this was not going to end well. The guards unlocked the door, and as they swung it open, Jack was pulled out of the cell. His hands were shackled, but he barely noticed. The queen was waiting for him, her eyes calculating, as if she were deciding something important. "Human," she said, her voice a cold, musical tone that sent a shiver down Jack's spine. "You will come with me?" Jack narrowed his eyes. "What do you want with me?" The queen regarded him for a moment, a hint of something unspoken flashing in her eyes. "You are not like the others," she said softly, almost to herself. "You have a strength inside you, a resilience that intrigues me." Jack's brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about." But the queen didn't answer. She simply motioned for him to follow her. There was no room for argument, no space for negotiation. Jack didn't know what awaited him, but he knew he had little choice. As they made their way out of the prison, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger, something that would change the fate of not only him, but of his entire species. The queen led him aboard her ship, which was like nothing he had ever seen before. The interior was sleek, metallic, and sterile, with strange, glowing symbols etched into the walls. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar chemicals, and the low hum of the ship's engines resonated through the floor. Jack was led to a small chamber, a room that seemed oddly out of place in such a high-tech vessel. It was simple, almost too simple for a queen's personal space, and yet there was something about it that made Jack uneasy. The queen turned to face him once more. "You are going to help me, human," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "And in return, you will have a chance to survive. Your kind will be spared." Jack's heart raced as he tried to process what she was saying. "What do you mean by help me?" he asked, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. The queen's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of something more than cold calculation in her gaze. "You will be the father of my child," she said, her words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. Jack blinked, not sure if he had heard her correctly. "What?" The queen's gaze softened just a little. "It is the only way to secure the future of my people. You will help me bring forth a new generation, a new strength that will save us all." Jack's mind spun, trying to make sense of her words. The queen, an alien ruler of an empire that had destroyed Earth, was asking him to father her child. The idea seemed absurd, impossible. But as he looked into her eyes, Jack saw no sign of deception. She was dead serious. In that moment, Jack understood that his survival, and possibly the survival of his species, depended on what happened next. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the ship's systems. Jack sat on a cold, metallic chair, his hands still bound by the Zalthari shackles, his mind racing. His body was stiff, his nerves raw from the unexpected turn his life had taken. Just moments ago, he had been a prisoner in a dark, oppressive facility, trying to survive another day. Now he was aboard the Queen's flagship at her mercy, with no idea what would happen next. The Queen, Tizora, had told him that he would help her secure the future of her people, but what did that mean? Father her child. The words haunted him. He had no idea how this was supposed to work or why she had chosen him. He had heard of alien species being desperate for new blood, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. As he sat there, the ship's walls glowed with an eerie, bluish light. The technology around him was far beyond anything humanity had ever created. The Zalthari had mastered space travel and warfare, their fleets dark and powerful. But here, in this sterile room, it wasn't the technology that caught Jack's attention. It was the alien queen standing before him. Tizora was tall, her posture regal and commanding. Her scales shimmered with an iridescent hue, shifting from deep green to a silvery blue as she moved. Despite her beauty, there was an unmistakable coldness to her presence. She was the ruler of a vast empire, feared and respected by all, yet there was something more behind her eyes, a kind of loneliness, perhaps, or a deep burden. "You must be wondering why I have chosen you," she said, her voice a low, melodic hum. It was the first time she had spoken to him since they boarded her ship. She paced slowly around the room, her steps light and graceful. "You are different from the others. Your kind has a strength, a resilience that I believe could help my people survive." Jack glanced up at her, still trying to process everything. "You're saying you want me to help you? Have a child?" Tizora stopped pacing and turned to face him. Her eyes glowed faintly, as though they held the weight of 1,000 decisions, each one shaping the future of her race. "Yes," she replied, her tone firm but not without a hint of something else. "These Zalthari are dying. Our genetic pool is shrinking, and without diversity, we will not survive. I believe that your human genes, your adaptability, will give my people a new chance." Jack's mind spun. The idea of fathering a child for an alien queen was absurd, impossible even. Yet there she stood, offering him an opportunity not for freedom but for something even more dangerous. "So what happens now?" Jack asked, his voice quieter now. He didn't know if he was asking for clarification or just trying to understand how to survive this strange new reality. Zora's eyes softened, but only slightly. She walked over to a table at the far end of the room and picked up a small device. It was sleek and unfamiliar, with glowing symbols running along its surface. "What happens now," she said, "is that you will prove your worth. It is not enough to simply be human. You must show me that you can endure what is to come. Only then will I consider you worthy to be the father of my child." Jack's breath caught in his throat. Endure? What did she mean by that? Before he could ask, the door to the room slid open and two guards entered. They were tall, their reptilian features barely visible beneath the dark armor they wore. They spoke in their native tongue, their voices low and guttural. Zora nodded to them, and they approached Jack, grabbing him by the arms and forcing him to stand. Jack struggled briefly, but he was outnumbered. They were stronger, faster, and much more physically imposing than any human he had ever encountered. He didn't fight them, not yet. He needed to know what was happening first. He didn't want to provoke them into something he couldn't control. The guards led him down a narrow corridor, and Jack could feel the weight of the situation closing in on him. Every step took him further from what he knew, further from the safety of his own kind, into the heart of the unknown. They reached a large chamber, its walls lined with intricate symbols and strange, glowing devices. In the center of the room stood a circular platform, its surface covered in what looked like ancient markings. It pulsed with energy, and Jack could feel the hum of power as he approached. Zora stood at the edge of the platform, her eyes fixed on him. "This is the trial," she said simply. "You will face it, and only then will you prove yourself worthy." Jack felt his pulse quicken. What kind of trial was this? He had survived many battles, many horrors, but this was unlike anything he had ever faced. He glanced at Zora, his mind racing for a way to escape, a way out of this madness. But there was none. He was trapped. Without another word, the guard stepped back, leaving him alone with the queen. Zora's gaze was unblinking, waiting for him to make the first move. Jack could see the unspoken command in her eyes, "Prove yourself." He took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of his strength. His years of military training kicked in, and he knew he couldn't back down now. Whatever this was, it was a test of survival, and survival was the one thing Jack had learned to master. He stepped onto the platform, feeling its cool surface against his bare feet. The air around him thickened, and suddenly the room seemed to come alive. A series of lights flickered to life around him, and the walls began to shift, revealing strange, alien creatures lurking in the shadows. They weren't like the Zalthari guards. These were creatures that Jack had never seen before. They were fast, agile, and looked almost like nightmares made flesh. The creatures circled him, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. Jack's pulse quickened, and he could feel his muscles tensing. This was it. This was the trial. Without warning, one of the creatures lunged at him. Jack reacted instinctively, grabbing its arm and twisting it until it let out a horrible screech. He threw it to the ground and faced the others, his mind fully alert, every sense on high alert. The creatures attacked one after another, each more dangerous than the last. Jack fought back with everything he had. He wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting for his humanity, for the future of his species. Each creature he defeated only led to more, and he had no choice but to keep fighting, to keep pushing forward. Minutes turned into hours, or so it felt. The creatures kept coming, each one more deadly than the last. Jack's body ached, his limbs heavy, but he refused to give in. He had to survive, for himself, for Earth, for humanity. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the last creature fell. Jack stood in the center of the platform, breathing heavily, covered in sweat and blood, but still standing. Zora stepped forward, her gaze intense. "You have proven yourself," she said. "You are worthy." Jack collapsed to his knees, exhausted, but a small part of him felt a strange sense of accomplishment. He had survived the trial, but what came next, he had no idea. The only thing he knew for sure was that he had just crossed a line, and there was no going back. The days blurred together after the trial. Jack's body still ached from the physical exhaustion, his muscles sore from the relentless combat. But it wasn't just his body that hurt. His mind was tangled with questions, with uncertainty. He had proven himself in the trial, yes, but to what end? What was the Queen's true plan? Why had she chosen him? And most importantly, what did all of this mean for humanity? He had expected to be thrown into another cell, perhaps forgotten in the depths of the Queen's flagship, but that wasn't what happened. After the trial, T-Zora had ordered him to be taken to a private chamber. The room, like the rest of the ship, was sleek and metallic, illuminated by soft blue lights that seemed to pulse gently as if alive. He was given fresh clothes, food, and a bed, a far cry from the prison cell he had spent so many months in. But the luxury felt hollow. Jack couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut, the unease that hung over him like a storm cloud. What was this all for? T-Zora had remained distant, only speaking to him when necessary. She didn't give him many answers, but every now and then when their paths crossed, her gaze lingered on him, intense, calculating, as though she was always assessing him. Jack had learned to be cautious around her, to watch his words carefully. She was a ruler, a leader of an empire that spanned countless worlds, and she had chosen him for something he couldn't yet understand. Then one day, after what seemed like weeks of silence, T-Zora came to him with an unexpected request. She appeared at the entrance to his room, her regal presence filling the doorway. Jack stood up immediately, instinctively, and watched as she entered. Her scales shimmered in the light, her movements fluid and graceful. Despite her beauty, there was an air of coldness to her that made Jack's skin crawl. "You've completed the trial," she said, her voice as smooth as ever, but there was something different in her tone this time, something almost uncertain. "You have proven your worth." Jack said nothing, waiting for her to explain what she meant. He had been waiting for her to make her next move, but this was the first time he had sensed any hint of vulnerability in her. "I told you that I would give you a choice," she continued, her eyes locking onto his. "You will help me build a new future for my people, a future where my race can survive, but I am asking you to consider something personal." Jack furrowed his brow. What kind of choice? He didn't know what to expect, but he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she was about to ask would change everything. "I need you to understand," she said softly, her voice uncharacteristically quiet. "What I ask of you is not only for my people. It is for the future of this galaxy. I am not merely seeking a child, I am seeking a legacy." Jack didn't speak. The air between them was thick with tension. He didn't trust her, couldn't trust her, but there was something in the way she spoke, something that made him pause. She was serious. She wasn't playing some game. T-Zora stepped closer to him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "The child you will father," she continued, "is not just any offspring. It will be the beginning of a new era for both of our species. My people have been dying, weakening over time. We are at the brink of extinction. But together, we could create something more than either of us could alone. A hybrid child born of both our kinds could be the key to the survival of both races." Jack took a step back, trying to process what she was saying. The idea of a hybrid child, the union of two species that had been enemies for so long, was a shocking one. It was dangerous. But at the same time, Jack understood the desperation in her words. He could see the truth in her eyes, the weight of her position as ruler of an empire on her shoulders. The Zalthari were dying, and they would do anything to survive, even if it meant reaching out to humanity, the very species they had once sought to conquer. "But why me?" Jack finally asked. "There are other humans, why choose me?" T-Zora's gaze softened slightly. For a moment, Jack thought he saw something human in her, a flicker of emotion that was so rare in her it almost felt out of place. "I have watched you, Jack Ryder. You are different from the others. You survived the trial, yes, but you also showed something more. You showed resilience, strength, intelligence. You are adaptable. My people have lost their ability to adapt. They are stuck in their ways, unwilling to change. But you could teach them, and that is what I need." Jack didn't respond immediately. He was processing her words, trying to make sense of it all. He didn't know what to say, how to respond to something this complicated. All he knew was that the decision ahead of him wasn't just about survival. It was about the future of two species. "You're asking me to become part of your plan for survival?" Jack asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "To father your child and in doing so help save your entire empire?" T-Zora nodded. "Yes." Jack stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always fought for humanity, for his people. He had seen the horrors of war, the destruction of Earth, and the fall of his civilization. But now, faced with the possibility of being part of something larger than himself, something that could affect the fate of both races, he didn't know what to think. Was this his chance to make a real difference? Or was he just another pawn in the Queen's game? Finally, he spoke. And if I refuse, T-Zora didn't flinch. Then you will die, my people will die, the galaxy will continue its slow decay. This is the only way forward. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. There was no escape from this choice. He either helped the Queen or he condemned both species to extinction. Why are you telling me this now? Jack asked, still struggling to understand her motives. Why not just force me? T-Zora took a step back, her expression hardening once more. Because I need your willingness, I need your trust. Without it, this plan will fail. Jack was silent again, his mind racing. He wasn't just being asked to father a child. He was being asked to be part of a vision of survival for both species. He had never imagined such a thing could exist, and he wasn't sure if he could trust the Queen to carry it out. But at the same time, the alternative seemed worse. His people had already lost their home. Could he really watch another species die, knowing he could have done something to stop it? T-Zora watched him carefully, waiting for an answer. Jack met her gaze, his eyes searching for the truth in hers. And for the first time, he saw something different. It wasn't just power. It wasn't just cold calculation. There was a flicker of something else, something almost human. After a long moment, Jack finally nodded. I'll do it, but know this, Queen T-Zora, if I do this, I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for the future, for both our people. T-Zora's eyes softened just slightly. Then we will begin together. As she turned and walked toward the door, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers and questions. But one thing was clear. He had made his choice and there was no turning back. The weeks that followed were a blur for Jack. The Queen's plan was set in motion and there was no turning back now. Every day he was trained, tested, and pushed to his limits. He had once believed that survival was a matter of escaping his circumstances, of getting through each day. But now, in the hands of Queen T-Zora, survival had become a mission, a responsibility that he could not ignore. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about two species, two worlds, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The Queen had given him a purpose. Whether that purpose would save or destroy them all, only time would tell. The first few days after his agreement had been a quiet storm of preparation. He had been moved to a larger, more comfortable chamber, the walls lined with strange Zalthari technology. The room felt like it was both alive and dead, filled with devices that hummed softly but had no clear function. Despite the luxury, Jack felt trapped. The sense of isolation had grown heavier as the days wore on. T-Zora continued her calculated approach, speaking to Jack only when necessary. She never wasted words, always direct, always focused on the future. Her people, the Zalthari, were in a desperate situation, and her cold demeanor reflected that. There were no moments of warmth, no gestures of kindness. Everything was about the greater cause. But Jack had started to see cracks in her exterior, tiny glimpses of the burden she carried. He had caught her on a few occasions, standing in the corner of the room, her gaze distant and lost in thought, as though the weight of the galaxy was too much to bear. In those moments, he had seen the truth behind her actions. She wasn't just a cold ruler. She was a leader, desperately trying to save what remained of her people, and she would do anything to make it happen. And yet, Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to the Queen's plan than she was telling him. He had learned that the Zalthari were secretive, withholding, and calculating. But even so, he couldn't ignore the sense of impending danger that loomed over them both. The tension was building, and Jack could feel it in the air, in the way the Queen's eyes would flicker with something almost like doubt. One evening, T-Zora came to him unexpectedly. She stood in the doorway of his chamber, her tall, imposing figure silhouetted by the dim light from the hall. There was something different in her expression, a flicker of something he couldn't place. "Jack," she said, her voice low, "it's time." Jack had learned that when she spoke like that, it meant something important was about to happen. He stood up from the chair where he had been sitting, his heart racing. He had no idea what she meant, but he followed her without question. She led him down the narrow corridors of the ship, the soft sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. The ship seemed alive in its own way, every corner shrouded in mystery. They arrived at a large chamber, its walls covered in glowing symbols. The air felt thicker here, almost charged. At the center of the room was a raised platform, its surface dark and smooth. It hummed with an energy Jack couldn't quite understand. "You've come far," T-Zora said as they stepped inside. Her tone was not unkind, but there was an edge to it. But now you must face the final test. Jack looked around, his mind racing. What test? I thought the trial was over. The trial of endurance, yes, Zora replied, her eyes narrowing slightly. But this is different. This is not about strength. It is about unity, about the future we will create together. Jack's stomach tightened. What do you mean, unity? What's going on here, Zora? The Queen's gaze softened for just a moment before she spoke again. You will join with me, Jack. You will become part of something greater than either of us. Together, we will create a new generation, one that could change the galaxy. Jack felt a wave of confusion wash over him. He had already agreed to father her child, but this felt different. There was something more in her words now, something that made him uneasy. I thought this was about saving your people, Jack said, his voice low. Is this about more than just that? Zora looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest. Jack tensed at the unexpected touch, but he didn't pull away. She had always been in control, and right now, she wasn't showing any signs of backing down. This is about more than survival, Jack, she said quietly. This is about evolution. My people cannot survive without change. You are the key to that change. The child we create together will be the first of a new kind, not just Zalthari, not just human. But something entirely new. Jack swallowed hard. He had known that this was bigger than him, but now he understood the full scope of it. The child they would have together wasn't just a symbol of hope, it was the future of two races. The very idea of it felt surreal. And if we fail? Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. If this doesn't work, what happens to us? Zora's gaze darkened. Then my people will die, your people will die, the galaxy will continue to decay, but I will not let that happen, I cannot. Jack was silent for a long time, considering her words. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about creating something new, something that had never existed before. If it worked, it could change the fate of the entire galaxy. But if it failed, he looked at Zora, seeing her vulnerability for the first time. She wasn't just an alien ruler. She was a leader in the truest sense, willing to sacrifice everything to save her people. The responsibility of what she was asking him to do was overwhelming, but Jack knew that he couldn't back out now. He had already chosen a path, and there was no turning back. I understand, he said finally, his voice steady. I'll do it. I'll help you create the future you want. Zora's eyes softened just a little, and for a moment, Jack saw something like gratitude in her gaze. But it was fleeting, gone almost as soon as it appeared. The Queen was still the ruler of an empire, still the cold, calculating leader who had made decisions that would shape the galaxy for generations to come. But in that moment, Jack understood her better than he ever had. Then we begin, she said, her voice firm once more. She stepped back, gesturing to the platform at the center of the room. You are ready. Jack took a deep breath, his nerves settling into a strange calm. There was no turning back now. He had already made his choice, and the future of both species rested in his hands. As he stepped forward, Zora watched him with a gaze that was both commanding and searching. She was watching not just for his physical readiness, but for his mental resolve. Jack could feel it. The weight of the galaxy was in her eyes. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would build something new, something that neither of them could have ever imagined. And as Jack stood in that room, looking at the Queen who had brought him here, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The quiet hum of the ship surrounded Jack as he sat in the chamber, his mind racing. The events of the last few days had been a whirlwind. The decision he had made was not one he had come to lightly, and now, as the days passed, he found himself feeling the weight of it more and more. Zora had been right about one thing. This wasn't just about the survival of her people or the future of her empire. It was about something far greater, something he had only begun to understand. The Queen had been adamant about the process, her focus unwavering. Every step had been calculated, each moment important, each decision made with a purpose. Jack had thought he understood what it meant to fight for survival, to fight for his people. But now, in the hands of Zora, he was fighting for the future of two races. The responsibility was staggering. But as the days wore on, Jack began to realize that his role in this was not as simple as he had once thought. He wasn't just a tool for creating a hybrid child. He was part of something far more complex, something that had the potential to reshape the entire galaxy. He had learned a great deal about the Zalthari in these past few weeks. The Queen had shared more of her people's history with him, how they had once been a powerful, thriving race, their empire stretching across countless worlds. But their downfall had come slowly, piece by piece. Over time, their population had dwindled, their once unstoppable might had faded, and they were left with little more than a memory of their former glory. Their survival, T. Zora had explained, depended on drastic change. And that was why Jack had been chosen, to be the catalyst for that change. As Jack sat there, the door to his chamber slid open, and T. Zora entered. She didn't speak immediately. Her eyes searched the room as if she were looking for something hidden beneath the surface. Jack stood up as she approached, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that today something would be different. "Jack," T. Zora said, her voice steady but carrying a weight Jack had not heard before. "The time has come to make our choice permanent." Jack met her gaze, his mind still processing her words. He had expected this moment, but now that it was here, he couldn't help but feel a surge of uncertainty. It was one thing to agree to father her child, to be a part of her vision for the future. But to make that choice permanent, to become part of something greater, was a different matter entirely. He nodded slowly, trying to steady himself. "I'm ready. I know what's at stake." T. Zora's gaze softened slightly, but there was still an air of intensity about her. "This will not be easy, Jack. It will change everything, both for you and for me. There is no turning back after this." Jack swallowed hard. "I understand. I've already made my choice." The Queen nodded, then motioned for him to follow her. Jack didn't hesitate. There was no more time for second-guessing. He followed T. Zora down the corridor, the ship's lights flickering softly as they moved. The familiar hum of the engines seemed almost deafening now, as if the entire ship was holding its breath. They reached a large chamber at the heart of the ship. This room, unlike the others Jack had seen, was filled with strange, organic structures that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. At the center of the room was a large, circular platform, surrounded by intricate designs and glowing symbols. The air around it hummed with energy, and Jack could feel the power emanating from it. T. Zora turned to him, her expression serious. "This is where it will happen. The moment that will change both of our worlds." Jack stepped forward, his heart racing. This was it. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew that whatever happened in this room would determine the fate of not only himself, but the entire galaxy. Without a word, T. Zora activated the platform. The room seemed to come alive as the symbols on the floor lit up, glowing with an otherworldly light. Jack felt a surge of energy course through his body, and for a brief moment, he wondered if he was about to lose control. But the Queen's voice, calm and steady, brought him back to the present. "Focus, Jack," she said. "This is not just about our connection, it is about the future, the legacy we will leave behind." Jack took a deep breath and nodded. He couldn't let fear control him. This was his choice, and it had always been his choice. He had chosen to help the Queen, to help both species survive. Now he had to see it through. T. Zora stepped closer, her eyes locked onto his. "We will create something new together, something stronger. Something that will live beyond the limitations of both our species." Jack nodded again, his mind focusing. He could feel the power of the platform growing, the energy building between him and T. Zora. It wasn't just physical. It was a connection that went beyond anything he had ever experienced. For a brief moment, he wondered if it was more than just survival, if this was truly a new beginning for both of them. T. Zora placed her hand on his chest, her touch gentle but firm. Jack felt the warmth of her skin, the subtle pressure of her fingers. It was an intimate moment, one that seemed to transcend the roles they had played in their lives. They were no longer just enemies, not just a soldier and a ruler. They were two beings bound together by a singular purpose. For the first time, Jack saw something in T. Zora's eyes that he hadn't seen before. It was more than determination. It was hope, a kind of hope that had been missing from her eyes ever since he had met her. It was as if, in that moment, they were both seeing the possibility of a future they had never dared to dream of. "I'm ready," Jack said softly, the words carrying more weight than he had ever meant them to. T. Zora nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "Then let us begin." The energy between them intensified as the platform's light grew brighter, enveloping them in a glow so intense that Jack could barely see. He felt the warmth of T. Zora's hand against his chest, the hum of energy between them. It was as if they were no longer separate beings, but part of something larger, something more powerful. For a long moment, there was only the sound of their breathing, the quiet pulse of the platform, and the growing energy that surrounded them. Jack could feel his heart race, but there was no fear now, just a deep, undeniable certainty. He had made his choice, and now he would see it through. When the light finally began to fade, the room returned to its usual dim glow. Jack felt a sense of exhaustion wash over him, but also a strange sense of peace. It was as if the air had shifted, as if something profound had happened. Zora stepped back, her gaze still intense. She looked at him as if she were seeing him for the first time, and Jack couldn't help but feel a flicker of something more than just survival. "It is done," she said softly. "The future is ours to shape." Jack took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as he slowly processed what had just happened. He didn't know what the future held, no one could. But in that moment, he knew that he had done what was necessary, what had to be done. He had helped create something new, something that could change the future for both their species. And as he looked at the Queen standing before him, he realized that he was no longer just a prisoner, no longer just a soldier. He was part of something far greater, a legacy that would shape the galaxy for generations to come. For better or worse, the future was in their hands now, and there was no turning back.